Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. 3 days had passed, and the world remained eerily still. The sun rose and fell in its usual rhythm, casting its golden light across vast, lifeless cities. Towering buildings stood unscathed, their windows reflecting the dawn with a ghostly indifference. Traffic lights continued their programmed cycles, blinking red, yellow, green, each change utterly meaningless. Street vendors' carts sat abandoned, their goods untouched, their owners missing. Digital billboards played advertisements to no one. In homes, televisions hummed with static, dinner tables remained set, and half-drunk cups of coffee had gone cold. But there were no people, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no last messages scrawled in desperation. It was as if humanity had been exhaled in a single breath, leaving behind only the empty shell of civilization. The world was neither destroyed nor abandoned. It had simply lost its inhabitants in an instant. Yet, humanity was not gone. They remained, somewhere, somehow. They felt their own presence in a way they had never experienced before. There was no weight, no form, no boundary to their existence. Yet their minds were sharp, their awareness excruciatingly clear. They were not ghosts, nor were they dead. They simply were. At first, the realization came slowly, like waking from a dream. Panic followed soon after. Where am I? What happened? Why can't I see myself? The questions raced through their minds, unanswered. Some struggled, trying to move phantom limbs that no longer existed. Others attempted to call out, but their voices found no medium to travel through. The silence was suffocating, not an absence of sound, but something deeper, more profound. A silence that pressed in from all directions, vast and inescapable. And then, the second realization struck, a horror even greater than the first. They could sense everything. Every displaced mind became an open channel, an exposed nerve stretched across the fabric of existence. They felt the hum of electricity coursing through empty power lines, the slow shifting of the Earth's plates beneath the oceans, the distant ripple of radiation from dying stars. Time no longer passed in a linear flow. It pulsed, warped, coiled in on itself. They felt light, not as a mere brightness, but as a pressure against the edge of their awareness. They tasted the static in the air, the iron tang of electromagnetic waves thrumming through space. And worse, they were not alone. At first, the presence was subtle, a whisper at the edge of perception, a shadow in a space where shadows should not exist. Then it grew more distinct. Something vast loomed beyond their understanding, watching, studying. It was not human. It was not anything they could name. It was ancient, deliberate, patient. The sensation was unbearable, like being dissected under an unblinking, indifferent gaze. That was when they understood. This was no accident. They had not simply vanished. They had been removed. The truth pressed against their minds like cold steel. They had been targeted, extracted from existence by something beyond their comprehension. A coalition of interstellar civilizations, long wary of humanity's unchecked ambition, had decided that the species was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. Their solution had been swift, absolute, a weapon not of destruction, but of erasure. Yet, something had gone wrong. Humanity had not been erased. The weapon had failed in its intended purpose. Instead of annihilation, it had displaced them, stripped them of physical form, and cast them into an existence beyond matter. The universe had tried to delete them, but they had slipped through the cracks, existing now in the spaces in between. And now, they were everywhere. They were no longer bound by flesh, but neither were they powerless. The laws that had once governed their reality no longer applied in the same way. They could not touch, but they could influence. A flicker in the streetlights, a whisper of movement in an empty room, a sudden chill down the spine of a lone survivor in an alien world. The universe had lost its ability to see them, but it had not lost its ability to feel them. The first experimentations were accidental, shadows that moved when no one was near, books falling from shelves with no wind to disturb them, the flickering of a candle flame in a room that should have been still. But soon, the scattered remnants of humanity began to understand. They were not entirely powerless in this new form. If they focused, if they willed it, they could exert force upon the world they had been taken from. And that meant one thing: they could come back. The thoughts spread like wildfire, leaping from mind to mind, connecting them in a web of shared determination. If they had survived the impossible once, they could do it again. They could adapt, evolve, reclaim what had been stolen from them. They did not know how. Not yet. But they would. The civilizations that had feared humanity had unknowingly created something far worse than the threat they had sought to eliminate. They had attempted to unmake an entire species, but in doing so, they had forced humanity to transcend. And now, humanity was watching them. For the first time, those who had orchestrated the purge would feel what it was like to be the ones observed, the ones studied, the ones hunted. A single whisper passed through the void, silent yet deafening. "We're not gone." The universe had underestimated them, a mistake it would soon regret. Daniel was unraveling, not in the way a man breaks down under pressure, not in the way a mind fractures under grief or fear. This was something worse. He was losing definition, his sense of self bleeding into the formless abyss around him. He could feel the edges of his existence thinning, dissolving, as if he had been left out in the rain too long and was now fading like ink on damp paper. He tried to hold on to something, anything, to keep himself together, but there was nothing to grasp. No hands to clutch at his own unraveling thoughts, no body to center himself in. There was only silence, vast and suffocating, stretching in all directions. He had no weight, no tether, only thought, and even though was beginning to feel fragile. Then, through the static of his own disintegration, came another presence. Faint at first, like a whisper through thick fog, but growing stronger. It pressed against his awareness, familiar yet distorted, as though he were remembering a voice from a dream he had long since forgotten. Daniel? It was not a sound, not a vibration carried through air. It bypassed everything he once knew about language and reached straight into the core of him. For a moment, something clicked into place. A memory, a feeling. Sarah. Relief surged through him, not in a physical way. There was no heartbeat to race, no breath to catch in his throat, but in a way deeper than flesh. She was here. He was not alone. He latched onto her presence like a drowning man grabbing hold of a lifeline. The unraveling slowed. He could feel himself again, not entirely, not as he once was, but enough. Enough to push back against the void and remind himself that he still was. What the hell is happening to us? Sarah's voice was sharp, edged with tension, but steady. She was keeping herself together through sheer force of will. "We're not dead," he answered. A pause. "Then, that doesn't explain what we are now." He didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. Around them, the void shifted. A ripple, a disturbance in the suffocating silence. It was subtle, but undeniable. Something else was here. Something watching. Daniel focused, pushing his perception outward. He had no eyes, no sense of direction, but somehow he felt it, an intelligence pressing against the fabric of their existence. Cold, mechanical, indifferent. It wasn't searching out of curiosity. It was verifying, confirming its success. This was not an accident. A realization crashed into him like a tidal wave. The absence of humanity was not a mystery waiting to be solved. It was a result, a consequence of a deliberate action. They had not been erased in the way fire consumes or decay eats away at flesh. They had been removed, excised from reality like a contaminant being purged from a system. And now, that system was making sure there were no lingering anomalies. No mistakes. The presence tightened its focus. It had sensed them. Daniel didn't need a body to feel the weight of its attention settling on him like a predator locking on a prey. The intelligence was vast, its awareness expanding in sharp, calculated waves, sweeping through the void, closing in. It had not seen them yet, not completely, but it was narrowing in on something out of place. Sarah felt it too. Daniel, it knows we're here. He didn't hesitate. We have to move. A bitter kind of humor flickered through him. How did one move in a place where space and distance had no meaning? There were no paths, no directions, no solid ground to push against. But he had felt something before. The moment he had recognized Sarah, the moment they had connected, something in the fabric of this strange existence had shifted. The void had reacted. Recognition had weight here. Awareness had force. Focus on me, he told her. Anchor to me. I'll do the same. He felt her pull tighter, her presence solidifying against his own. The space between them condensed, thickened, like the air before a thunderstorm. The void twisted around them, pressing in, resisting, and then they moved. Not forward, not backward, not in any direction they had ever known before. It was more like slipping, like finding the hidden current in an ocean and letting it drag them somewhere unseen. The presence reacted instantly. A shift, a lunge. It reached for them, but too late. Daniel felt something give, a crack in the formless abyss, a seam splitting open where there had been nothing but suffocating stillness before. He pushed, dragging Sarah with him as they slipped through the unseen gap, wrenching themselves free just as the presence slammed down behind them like a steel trap snapping shut. Then, light, not the absence of darkness, but something more, something immense. It flooded into them, searing away the emptiness, filling them with sound, motion, weight. For the first time since the moment the world had exhaled its people into nothingness, Daniel felt gravity. Shapes materialized, blurred and shifting, then sharpened into something real. He was moving, falling, but not through space. It felt deeper, like sinking through layers of reality itself. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with alarm. Daniel, what's happening? He tried to answer, but something pulled. A force stronger than any current, stronger than any tide. It seized him, yanking him downward, no, inward, towards something massive, something alive. The void had been empty. This place was not. And in that instant, Daniel understood one thing with bone-deep certainty. They had escaped, but they were not alone. Daniel tumbled through formless space, an abyss with no up, no down, only the weight of something vast pressing against him. He had no body, yet he felt the pull of something familiar. Gravity, breath, the sharp sensation of returning. It was as if he had been stretched thin across existence, barely held together, and now, something unseen was snapping him back into place. Then, pressure. A force wrapped around him, dense and unrelenting, squeezing him through a gap too narrow for his existence. It wasn't pain, but it was close. His mind strained under the weight of sensation returning, his consciousness folding back into the boundaries of a body that shouldn't exist. A heartbeat, air in his lungs, cold beneath his fingertips. His eyes shot open. He lay sprawled on a smooth, dark surface that pulsed faintly with shifting hues, deep purples and indigos that rolled beneath him like distant waves. The light was subtle, more of a presence than an illumination, humming with an energy that sent a low vibration through his bones. It was neither metal nor stone, but something else, something alive. Sarah gasped beside him. She was on her hands and knees, fingers pressing into the strange floor as if testing its reality. Her dark hair clung to her face, damp with sweat. She sucked in sharp, uneven breaths, her whole body trembling under the weight of existing again. She looked up at him, eyes wild with disbelief. Are we alive? Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. The question shouldn't have been complicated, but it was. He flexed his fingers, curled his toes against the ground. His breath was real. His pulse pounded against his ribs. He had never felt more here. I think so, he murmured, but the uncertainty clung to the words. Sarah let out a short, breathless laugh and collapsed on her back, staring up at the endless expanse above them. I don't know if that's better or worse. Daniel sat up slowly, scanning the space around them. The room, or whatever it was, stretched infinitely, its edges lost in a haze that shimmered like heat on asphalt. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen, as though the space itself was waiting. Then a voice. "You are different than expected." The words didn't come from a direction. They simply were, slipping into his mind like a thought that wasn't his own. Daniel twisted, searching for a source. Nothing. No speakers, no figures, no mouths to form the words. Sarah's body tensed. "Who's there?" A pause, then the voice again, calm and absolute. "You're displaced." A fracture within the weave. Daniel's fingers clenched into fists. "What does that mean?" "You were meant to be gone." The words settled over them like a weight. Sarah shot Daniel a look, her expression screaming the message. Don't react. Don't show them fear. He took a slow breath, forcing his voice to stay steady. And yet, here we are. The pulsing beneath them flickered, the deep violet momentarily surging into a pale white before settling again. A moment of hesitation. "You persisted." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Wasn't supposed to, was we?" Silence stretched. Then, the haze around them thickened. Shadows moved within it, figures indistinct but undeniably present. They did not step forward, did not solidify, but their presence was suffocating. Watching, measuring. Daniel's pulse hammered. "Who are you?" The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, the pulsing beneath them slowed, steadying into something more deliberate. Then finally, "We are the architects of correction." Correction. The word slotted into place like a key turning in a lock. The presence that had hunted them in the void, the force scanning for remnants. It had not been a malfunctioning system. It had been designed. The purge had been deliberate. Sarah's voice was barely more than a whisper. "You did this." The figures in the haze did not move. It was necessary. Daniel felt his body tighten, muscles coiling as if preparing for a fight he couldn't yet define. Necessary for what? The hum beneath them deepened, vibrating through the floor and into his bones. Balance. The word carried weight, finality, but no explanation. Sarah pushed forward. "That's not an answer. You erased an entire species, and now you act like it was just an adjustment." "You misunderstand," the voice said, impassive. "You were not erased. You were removed. There is a difference." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Why?" A long pause. Then, "Because you were becoming something else." A pit formed in his stomach. He had expected their justification to be war, power, expansion, something rooted in history and reason. But this, Sarah shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. We weren't changing. We were just living." The light beneath them pulsed sharply. The figures in the haze wavered, momentarily disrupted. "You do not understand yourselves as we do. Your kind was shifting, evolving in ways unseen, in ways that could not be measured by your own perception. It was unpredictable." Daniel's mind reeled. Shifting? Evolving? A memory surfaced unbidden. The anomalies before the event. The moments of unexplainable instinct. The impossible recoveries. Strange coincidences, glimpses of something more beneath the surface of human existence. Had they been changing without realizing it? Was that what had doomed them? Daniel's breath came faster. "So, you decided to take us out before you could find out what we were becoming." The silence stretched, thick with inevitability. Then, with eerie calm, the voice answered. "Yes." Daniel's nails dug into his palms. His entire species had been culled not for what they had done, but for what they might have become. A preemptive strike. Sarah's voice was dangerously low. "And what happens now?" A flicker in the haze. The figures shifting slightly, as though considering. "That depends," the voice said. "You should not exist. And yet, here you are." Daniel felt a chill roll down his spine. They were an anomaly, a mistake in the system. And the architects of correction did not seem like the kind to let mistakes linger. The pulsing beneath them changed. The once rhythmic hum turned erratic, jarring. The ground trembled. Daniel felt it then, a force tightening around them, subtle but growing. A pressure at the edges of his being, as if the space itself had begun to reject their presence. Sarah exhaled sharply. a single word slipping from her lips. Run. The figures in the haze moved. The world collapsed. Reality collapsed, folding in on itself with a silent, suffocating finality. Daniel felt the architects while pressing down, a force unlike anything he had encountered before. Not destruction, not exile, but something deeper. A systematic undoing. The space they had occupied ceased to be, stripped away layer by layer. The void, once indifferent, now had intent. Sarah was beside him, her presence jagged and flickering, barely tethered to existence. They were unraveling, their very being dissected thread by thread. It wasn't pain, but it was close. Daniel fought against it. The architects had underestimated them before. They had thought humanity could be erased, excised from reality like an equation balanced to remove an unknown variable. But they were wrong. Not this time. He reached out, not physically because there was no body left to reach with, but with something deeper. His mind, his will. He pushed. Against the void. Against the force trying to reduce them to nothing. Against the inevitable. For a fraction of a second, he felt everything. The architects. The vast, humming mechanisms of their design. The staggering weight of the correction they had enacted across countless worlds. And then, something else. A break. A fracture in the system. An anomaly where none should exist. He fell through it. The moment stretched impossibly long, as if time itself had lost all coherence. Then, impact. Daniel slammed into the ground. The sensation, sudden and brutal. Air tore into his lungs, his chest convulsing with the desperate need to breathe. He rolled onto his side, coughing, body trembling under the weight of its own existence. Every nerve screamed in protest. His fingers scraped against rough stone, the texture anchoring him to reality. Sarah hit the ground beside him, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. She let out a low, strangled noise, half pain, half relief. Okay, she rasped. That was new. Daniel forced himself up, his vision swimming. The air here was thick, humid, charged with something electric. He could smell the dampness of the earth beneath him, the scent laced with something metallic and unfamiliar. They were somewhere else. Above them, the sky churned, if it could even be called a sky. It wasn't empty space, wasn't open air. It moved, shifting like a liquid cosmos, deep blues and purples bleeding into one another. No stars, no moon, just motion, as if the universe itself was breathing. The ground was uneven, a jagged landscape of obsidian-like rock interwoven with glowing veins of luminescent flora. Towering formations jutted at unnatural angles, defying any logic of gravity or erosion. Pools of faintly shimmering liquid reflected the shifting sky in distorted fragments. Sarah groaned and sat up, pressing a hand to her temple. Tell me we're not dead. Daniel let out a shaky breath. If we are, I'm filing a complaint. She let out a humorless laugh, scanning the landscape. Where the hell are we? Daniel pushed himself fully upright, scanning the terrain. It was neither the void they had escaped, nor the sterile construct of the architect's domain. It was something other. Sarah exhaled slowly. They didn't erase us. Daniel turned to her. They tried, she continued, looking around as if piecing it together. But something else happened instead. We didn't disappear. We were moved. Daniel's stomach twisted. So this place is where we landed, she finished. A mistake? A side effect? Or something intentional? Before he could answer, the ground beneath them vibrated. Not an earthquake. Not movement. A pulse. Low and rhythmic, not sound exactly, but pressure. It rippled through the air, through his bones, a resonance that bypassed hearing entirely. Sarah stiffened. You feel that? Daniel nodded. Not just feel. Here. The sensation wasn't external. It was inside them, threaded into their very presence. Like a frequency attuned to something deeper than physical reality. They weren't alone. A flicker of motion at the edge of his vision. Daniel turned sharply. A shadow shifted against the jagged rock formations, then another, and another. Figures emerging from the darkness, their outlines barely distinguishable against the glowing terrain. Sarah inhaled sharply. Tell me this isn't happening again. Daniel took a slow step forward. Who's there? The figures did not respond, did not advance. Just watched. Then a voice. Not the architects. Not the disembodied, omnipresent force that had haunted them before. This voice was weighted real. You are late. Daniel's breath stalled. The figures stepped into the light. Human. Not spectral echoes like those trapped in the void. Not disjointed fragments of thought clinging to existence. People. Flesh, breath, weight. Their clothes were worn, stitched together from unfamiliar materials, their faces lined with exhaustion and something deeper, something hard-earned. Recognition. Sarah's entire body went rigid. This isn't possible. One of the figures, a man with sharp eyes and a scar running from his temple to his jaw, studied them carefully. We weren't sure if you'd make it. Daniel's heart pounded. Who are you? The man's gaze didn't waver. Survivors. The words settled over Daniel like a physical weight. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. There are others. The man gave a slow nod. More than you think. More than they knew. The hum in the air deepened, vibrating through Daniel's ribs, through his very being. The architects had feared humanity was evolving. They had erased the species to prevent what was coming. But what if they had acted too late? What if the real threat wasn't what humanity might have become? What if it had already begun? The scarred man turned, gesturing toward the horizon where faint, flickering lights glowed in the distance. Come with us. There's much to explain. Daniel glanced at Sarah. She met his gaze, and in that moment, without speaking, they decided. They followed. The path wound through jagged rock formations, the air thick with an energy Daniel couldn't define. It pulsed beneath his skin, vibrating in his bones, as if the very ground recognized his presence. The survivors moved ahead with certainty, their steps confident despite the shifting terrain. They carried themselves like people who had spent a long time fighting, and an even longer time waiting. Sarah walked beside him, silent, her expression unreadable. She had barely spoken since they had set off, but Daniel could feel the questions tightening inside her, a storm gathering beneath the surface. The scar man, their guide, finally spoke. You felt it, haven't you? Daniel glanced at him. Felt what? The man looked at him, measuring. The change. Daniel didn't answer right away. He had been trying to ignore it, but the truth was undeniable. He was different. Since escaping the architects, his senses had sharpened. The world around him felt more present, colors deeper, sounds richer, the very air humming with something he couldn't name. His thoughts moved faster, connections forming before he could consciously make them. And beneath it all was a growing awareness of something vast, something waiting. Sarah spoke before he could. What happened to us? The scarred man's lips pressed into a thin line. You already know. You just don't want to say it. Daniel swallowed. The architects didn't remove us in time. The man nodded. They thought they were stopping something before it began. They were wrong. They crested a ridge, and suddenly the world unfolded before them. The landscape stretched into the distance, a valley carved between towering formations of dark stone. At its center lay a city, if it could be called that. The structures were woven from the terrain itself, rising like organic extensions of the earth, glowing veins of energy pulsing through them. Daniel slowed, taking it in. This wasn't a ruin. It was thriving. Sarah inhaled sharply. How many of you are here? The scarred man studied the valley. Enough. Daniel turned to him. Enough for what? The man met his gaze. To finish this, they led them down into the settlement, where the others were waiting. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Some looked like they had just arrived, confusion still fresh in their eyes. Others moved with quiet purpose, their postures steady, their presence undeniable. They felt different, like the very space around them bent to accommodate their existence. Sarah exhaled, shaking her head. This doesn't make sense. If the architects wiped out humanity, why are so many still here? They didn't wipe us out, the scarred man corrected. They separated us. Some went into the void. So we're pulled here. The rest, his voice trailed off. Daniel tensed. The rest what? The man's jaw tightened. The rest are still trapped. pieces of them scattered across what remains of the old universe. They didn't die. They were broken. A chill ran through Daniel. The architects had not simply erased humanity. They had fractured it, shattering their existence across countless unseen places. And somehow, those here had found a way to remain whole. A woman approached from the crowd, her dark eyes locked on them. She radiated presence, not in the way a leader commanded attention, but in the way something greater than itself passed through a human form. "You made it," she said. Her voice carried an authority that wasn't forced. Daniel couldn't explain how, but he knew this was someone who had been waiting for them. Sarah crossed her arms. "I'm going to need a lot more answers." The woman nodded, then listened carefully. She gestured toward the sky, where the churning void shimmered like an open wound. The architects were right about one thing. Humanity was changing. They didn't understand it, but they saw it coming, and it terrified them. Daniel frowned. "Changing how?" She looked at him. "You felt it." The air around him pulsed. His skin prickled with the sensation of something unseen pressing in, something aware. It wasn't coming from the ground or the sky. It was coming from him. His breath caught. Sarah's eyes widened. "What the hell is happening?" The woman stepped closer. "You weren't just displaced. You were forced through something. An event designed to erase you, but instead unlocked what was already inside." The architects thought they were stopping an evolution. She gestured at the people around them. But they caused it. Daniel's thoughts raced. The heightened senses, the connection to the world around him, the way he had resisted being erased. It wasn't luck. It was something else. "You're waking up," the woman said. "All of you." Sarah exhaled, rubbing her temples. "So what does that mean? We're not just human anymore." The woman's expression softened. "You're still human. Just more." Daniel shook his head. "And what happens now?" The scar man spoke this time. "We take back what was stolen." The words settled between them, heavy with finality. Sarah hesitated. "You're talking about the rest, aren't you?" The woman nodded. "They're still out there, lost in places they can't escape from. But we can reach them." Daniel's pulse quickened. The architects had broken humanity apart, scattered them across unknown realms. But the people here had found a way through. And now, they would bring the rest home. Sarah's voice was quiet. "You have a plan?" The woman met her gaze. "We've been preparing for a long time." Daniel looked at the people around them. They weren't soldiers, but they were something else. Something stronger. The architects had feared this transformation, but all they had done was accelerate it. He exhaled. "Then let's finish it." The woman smiled. The sky trembled. The world itself seemed to shift, and humanity rose. The air trembled, thick with something unseen, something waiting. The ground beneath Daniel's feet pulsed with energy, as if the world itself had woken from a long sleep. The survivors gathered in silence, their faces lit by the shifting glow of the strange city. There was no fear among them, no hesitation, only certainty. They had waited long enough. Daniel stood at the center, Sarah at his side, the weight of everything pressing into him. He had felt change creeping beneath his skin since their escape. But now, standing here, he understood. They were not just returning. They were becoming. The woman who had welcomed them stepped forward, her dark eyes meeting his. "You feel it, don't you?" Daniel nodded. "It's alive." She smiled. It always was. The realization settled deep in his bones. The architects had called them anomalies, had feared what they might become. But they had been wrong. Humanity had not been an accident. It had been inevitable. Sarah exhaled beside him. "So how does this work?" The woman lifted a hand, gesturing toward the horizon where the sky churned, its colors twisting like ink in water. Everything the architects built, every wall they raised, every fracture they created, it's all connected. And we are the connection. Daniel could feel it now, a current running through him, through all of them. It was not magic, not some new power bestowed upon them. It was simply the truth of what they were, what they had always been. The architects had feared their evolution, but in trying to stop it, they had forced it to accelerate. Sarah crossed her arms. "If we break through, what happens to them?" The woman's expression darkened. "They built this prison. But they never considered what would happen if the prisoners learned to walk through the walls. Daniel's pulse quickened. The architects had thought themselves untouchable, the keepers of order in a universe they believed was theirs to control. But they had overlooked something fundamental. You cannot erase something that refuses to be forgotten. He turned to the others, hundreds of survivors standing at the threshold of a future stolen from them. Are we ready? The scarred man who had led them here gave a sharp nod. We've been ready for a long time. A deep hum filled the air, the fabric of reality trembling under their collective force. The city itself responded, the glowing veins running through its structures brightening, pulsing with energy. Then the world shifted. The sky tore open, not violently, but deliberately. A fracture in the architect's design, a seam pulled apart by the sheer force of existence refusing to be denied. Beyond the rift, Daniel saw it, the lost ones. Not dead, not gone, scattered across the remnants of stolen time, trapped between what was and what should have been. He saw flickers of lives paused mid-motion, thoughts suspended in unfinished sentences, hands reaching for things they had forgotten how to hold. They were waiting. Sarah inhaled sharply. We can bring them back. The woman beside them nodded. Yes, but we don't just bring them back. We remind them who they are. Daniel understood. This was not a war, not a rebellion. This was remembrance. He stepped forward, reaching into the rift, into the places where humanity had been unwritten. He did not need force, did not need power. Only a single thought, a single undeniable truth. Come home. The response was immediate. The fracture widened, reality bending, breaking, reshaping. The stolen people moved. First one, then another, then thousands, pulled from the in-between from the lost places. They reformed, not as ghosts, not as echoes, but as what they had always been, human. The architects must have felt it, must have seen their great correction unraveling. Daniel did not care. He turned to Sarah, to the others. The weight of all they had done, all they had survived, burned in his chest. We're going back. No one questioned it. They stepped forward as one, moving through the threshold, through the wreckage of what had been, into what would be. And for the first time in 72 hours, humanity existed again.